The gunshot that killed Georgia Vaughn's hope came on a humid July morning in 1865, delivered not by a bullet, but by a telegram boy who could not meet her eyes. Georgia stood on the porch of her weathered farmhouse outside Clifton Hill, Missouri, reading the words that turned her world to ash. Private Samuel Vaughn, missing in action near Appomattox, presumed dead. The paper trembled in her hands as sweat trickled down her spine, the summer heat oppressive and unforgiving. She was 23 years old, married for 3 years, and now possibly a widow without even a body to bury. The telegram boy shuffled his feet in the dust, waiting for some response, but Georgia could only stare at the words until they blurred. When she finally looked up, he was already halfway down the road, his shoulders hunched as if trying to escape the weight of the news he had delivered. Inside the house, the silence pressed against her like a physical thing. The war had ended months ago, and soldiers had been trickling home with stories of glory and horror. Samuel had not been among them. For weeks, Georgia had clung to the hope that he was simply delayed, that he would come walking up the road with that crooked smile of his, full of apologies and explanations. Now, even that fragile hope had been stripped away. She moved through the rest of the day like a ghost, tending to the chickens, drawing water from the well, pulling weeds from the vegetable garden that was already half wild from neglect. The farm was too much for one person, especially a woman alone. The neighbors had been kind at first, sending their sons to help with the heavy work, but as the months stretched on and Samuel did not return, their assistance had dwindled. They had their own concerns, their own struggles in this hard country. By evening, Georgia sat on the porch steps and watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that reminded her of blood. She pressed her palms against her eyes and refused to cry. She had cried enough in the long nights since Samuel had marched away in his Union blue, had shed enough tears to water the fields. Crying changed nothing. The decision came to her slowly, settling into her bones like winter cold. She could not maintain this farm alone. The bank would come calling soon enough, and she had no money to pay what Samuel had borrowed to buy seed last spring. She would have to sell, would have to find work in town, perhaps as a seamstress or a cook. The thought filled her with a dull, aching resignation. 3 days later, Georgia was in Clifton Hill, standing in the office of Mr. Horace Pemberton, the local banker and land speculator. He sat behind his massive oak desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he regarded her with eyes that were neither kind nor cruel, merely calculating. "Mrs. Vaughn, I understand your predicament," he said, his voice smooth as rendered fat. "However, the property is not worth what your husband owed. The house needs extensive repairs and the fields have not been properly maintained. I can offer you $200 for the lot." Georgia's hands clenched in her lap. Samuel had paid $400 for that land, had worked it for 3 years before the war called him away. "That is robbery, Mr. Pemberton," he shrugged, unmoved. "That is business, Mrs. Vaughn. You are welcome to seek other buyers, of course." They both knew there were no other buyers. Clifton Hill was a small town, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Word had already spread that the Vaughn farm was in trouble. Georgia left the bank with her pride intact but her future crumbling. She walked down Main Street, past the general store and the saloon, past the blacksmith shop where Samuel used to get their plow sharpened. The town felt different now, smaller and meaner, as if it had contracted around her like a noose. She was so lost in her thoughts that she nearly collided with the man coming out of the general store. He caught her arm to steady her, and Georgia looked up, an apology on her lips that died when she saw him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown, falling past his collar in waves that suggested he had not seen a barber in months. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling clear gray that seemed to see right through her defenses. He wore buckskin and homespun, and a knife hung from his belt in a worn leather sheath. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Did not see you there." "My fault," Georgia managed, stepping back. His hand fell away from her arm, and she felt oddly bereft at the loss of contact. "I was not watching where I was going." He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes taking in details she could not fathom. Then he nodded once and moved past her, his boots heavy on the wooden boardwalk. Georgia stood there for a moment, watching him go. He moved with a kind of contained power, like a mountain cat she had once seen in the woods, all muscle and controlled grace. Then she shook herself. She had more pressing concerns than mysterious strangers. That evening, she sat in her kitchen and counted her remaining money, $37 and some change. It would not last long. She needed to find work, needed to figure out how to survive in a world that had little use for widows. The knock on her door came just after sunset, startling her so badly she nearly knocked over the lamp. Georgia opened the door cautiously, then froze in surprise. The man from town stood on her porch, a brace of rabbits in his hand. Up close, she could see the raw strength in his arms, the way his shirt pulled across his chest. He was built like men who worked hard every day of their lives, all lean muscle and coiled strength. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "name's Thomas Irving. I heard in town you might be having some difficulties." George's spine stiffened. "I do not need charity, Mr. Irving." "Not offering charity," he said calmly. "I am offering trade. I've been living up in the hills, trapping mostly, but I'm looking for a place to settle for a while. I could use somewhere to stay, and from what I saw riding up here, you could use help with this farm." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she did not need anyone's help, but the words stuck in her throat, because the truth was, she did need help, desperately. "I cannot pay you," she said finally. "Did not ask for pay, just room and board, maybe meals when it is convenient. I will do the heavy work, repairs, whatever needs doing." He paused, then added, "No strings, madam, just honest work for honest lodging." Georgia looked at him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but his expression remained open and guileless. Finally, she nodded slowly. "There is a barn. It has a loft. You could sleep there. That will do fine. And I expect you to be respectful, Mr. Irving. I am a married woman." Something flickered in his eyes at that, but he only nodded. "Yes, madam. You have my word." Thomas Irving moved into the barn that night, and Georgia lay in her bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else on her property. She did not know whether she'd made a wise decision or a foolish one, but it was done now. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Georgia dressed quickly and went outside to find Thomas on the roof of the barn, repairing the hole that had been leaking for the past 6 months. He had already fed the chickens and milked the cow, and there was fresh water sitting by her back door. "You have been busy," she called up to him. He looked down, his hair falling into his eyes. In the morning light, she could see he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28. "Farm has been neglected, no offense intended." "None taken, it is the truth." Over the following days, Thomas proved to be a man of his word. He repaired the barn roof, mended the fence that had been falling down, cleared the drainage ditch that had become clogged with debris. He worked from dawn until dusk, pausing only for the simple meals Georgia prepared. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured and thoughtful. Georgia found herself watching him sometimes, observing the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he split wood or the concentration on his face as he worked on some intricate repair. There was something almost hypnotic about his competence, the way he approached each task with quiet determination. 2 weeks after his arrival, Georgia was weeding the garden when Thomas approached, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Vaughn, I found something you should see." She followed him to the far pasture, where he pointed to tracks in the soft earth near the tree line. "Mountain lion, been circling the property. Probably smells the livestock." George's heart sank. They could not afford to lose any animals. "What should we do?" "I will keep watch tonight, see if I can scare it off or track it back to its den." "Is that safe?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw him almost smile. "I have dealt with mountain lions before, madam. I will be careful." That night Georgia could not sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the night sounds, wondering where Thomas was, whether he was safe. When morning came, she found him by the barn, cleaning his rifle. There was a long scratch on his forearm, but he seemed unconcerned. "Got a treat about 2 miles east. It will not be back." "You're hurt." "Just a branch. I'm fine." Georgia insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound anyway. As she worked, She became acutely aware of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, the quiet way he watched her. When she finished, their eyes met, and something passed between them, something she could not name but that made her heart race. She stepped back quickly. "Thank you for protecting the animals." "No need for thanks, it's my job." But it was more than a job, and they both knew it. As July turned to August, the farm began to transform. The fields that had been going to seed were plowed and planted with late-season crops. The buildings stood straight and proud, their roofs no longer leaking, their walls no longer sagging. Thomas worked tirelessly, and Georgia found herself working alongside him, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm that felt almost natural. They talked more as the days passed. Thomas told her about growing up in the Ozarks, about learning to hunt and trap from his father, about the years he had spent in the mountains after his parents died of cholera. He spoke of the solitude he had sought, the peace he had found in the wilderness. "Why did you leave?" Georgia asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. A man can only be alone for so long before it starts eating at him. "I woke up one morning and realized I had not spoken to another human being in 3 months. Seemed like maybe it was time to rejoin civilization, at least for a while." "Do you miss it? The mountains?" "Sometimes. But there are different kinds of peace." He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "I'm finding that out." George's breath caught. She knew she should say something, should remind him and herself of the boundaries that existed between them, but the words would not come. The next day, she rode into town for supplies. The general store was busy, and Georgia waited her turn, trying to ignore the whispers of the other women. She knew what they were saying, knew that tongues had been wagging about the strange mountain man living on the Vaughn farm. Small towns had long memories and sharp teeth. Martha Henderson, the banker's wife, approached her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Georgia, dear, how are you managing? We have all been so concerned about you alone out there." "I am managing fine, thank you, Martha." "Yes, well, we heard you have taken in a boarder, a man living on your property. People are talking, dear." Georgia felt her cheeks flush with anger. "Mr. Irving is helping with the farm in exchange for room and board. It is a business arrangement, nothing more." "Of course, dear. But you must understand how it looks. A young widow, a strange man. Perhaps it would be better if you came to stay in town, where there are people to look after you properly." "I do not need looking after, Martha. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." She left the store with her supplies, fuming. The judgment of small-minded people had never bothered her before, but now it felt like one more weight on shoulders already burdened. When she got home, Thomas was in the field, shirtless in the August heat, working on reinforcing the fence. The sun gleamed on his back, highlighting every muscle, and Georgia found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away, her face hot. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Thomas came to the kitchen door. "Mrs. Vaughn, may I speak with you?" "Of course." He stood awkwardly, his hat in his hands. "I heard some talk in town the other day, about me being here, about what people are saying. If my presence is causing you trouble, I can move on." "No," Georgia said, more forcefully than she intended. The thought of him leaving filled her with a panic she did not want to examine. "No, you have done so much for this place. I would not have managed without you. Let people talk. They will find something else to gossip about soon enough." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you are sure." "I am sure." But that night, lying in her bed, Georgia had to admit the truth to herself. She did not want Thomas to leave because she had grown to depend on him, not just for the work he did, but for his presence, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel safe. And more than that, she was starting to feel things she had no right to feel, not when Samuel might still be out there somewhere, not when her heart was supposed to be locked away in grief. September brought cooler weather and a surprise visitor. Georgia was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching, and her heart leaped into her throat when she recognized the uniform. A Union soldier, gaunt and weary, his arm in a sling. "Madam," he said, dismounting slowly, "I'm looking for the Vaughn farm." "This is it. I'm Georgia Vaughn." The soldier removed his hat, revealing a scarred face and kind eyes. "Madam, my name is Corporal Daniel Wheeler. I served with your husband." George's hands clenched in the wet sheet she was holding. "You knew Samuel?" "Yes, madam. We were in the same company. I was with him when he disappeared." Thomas appeared from the barn, his presence a solid comfort at George's back. The soldier glanced at him, then returned his attention to Georgia. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas. We were in Virginia, near Appomattox, just before the surrender. There was a skirmish with a Confederate rear guard. Samuel was separated from the company during the fighting. We searched for 2 days, but we could not find any trace of him. No body, nothing. The captain officially listed him as missing, presumed dead. "But you do not know for certain that he is dead?" The soldier hesitated. "Madam, it has been over a year. If he was alive, he would have come home by now. I am sorry. I know that is not what you want to hear, but I owe you the truth." Georgia nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me." "It is the least I could do. Samuel was a good man, a good soldier. He talked about you all the time, about this farm, about the life you were going to build together." The soldier paused, then added gently, "He would want you to be happy, madam. He would not want you to spend the rest of your life waiting for a ghost." After the soldier left, Georgia stood in the yard, the sheets forgotten in the basket. Thomas came to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I already knew," Georgia replied. "I have known for months, really. I just did not want to admit it." She turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "Does that make me a terrible person? That part of me is relieved to finally know?" "No, it makes you human." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he gently wiped the tears from her cheek with his thumb. "Grieving is not betrayal. Neither is living." Georgia leaned into his touch, letting herself take comfort from his strength. And for the first time since Samuel had marched away, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not include waiting. The harvest came, and with it, long days of hard work. Georgia and Thomas labored side by side, bringing in the crops, preserving what they could for winter. The physical exhaustion helped Georgia sleep at night, kept the ghosts at bay. And always there was Thomas, steady and reliable, his presence a constant she had come to cherish. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Thomas spoke quietly. "I need to tell you something." Georgia's heart stuttered. "What is it?" "I'm not just passing through, Georgia. I know that was what I said at first, but the truth is, when I came to this farm, when I met you, I found what I had been searching for all those years in the mountains. I found home." He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense in the moonlight. "I am here, and I'm staying put. If you will have me." George's breath caught. "Thomas, I know it has not been long since you got confirmation about Samuel. I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I care about you. I want to be here, to help you build this farm into something strong, to protect you, to—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not good with words, but I'm good with actions. Let me stay. Let me prove to you that I can be what you need." "You already are what I need," Georgia whispered. "You have been for months now. I just did not know how to say it, did not know if I had the right to feel this way. You have every right. Life is too short and too hard to waste it on should-haves and maybes." Georgia reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the warmth. "Then stay. Please stay." Thomas brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I'm not going anywhere." The first snow came in December, blanketing the farm in white silence. Georgia woke to find Thomas had already stoked the fire and started breakfast. They had fallen into a domestic routine that felt both strange and wonderful, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. On Christmas Eve, Thomas presented her with a carved wooden box he had been working on in secret, its surface covered in intricate designs of leaves and flowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "It is all I have left of her. I want you to have it." "Thomas, I cannot take your mother's ring." "Why not? I'm asking you to marry me, Georgia. I know we should probably wait longer, observe the proprieties, but I do not care about that. I love you, I have loved you since the day I saw you on that street in town, looking like your world had ended, but you were determined to keep standing anyway. Marry me. Make this real." Georgia looked at the ring, at the hope and vulnerability in Thomas's eyes, and felt something break open inside her. Joy, pure and bright, flooding through the cracks in her defenses. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. When he finally set her down, they were both grinning like fools. They were married in January 1866, in a simple ceremony in Clifton Hill, with only a few close friends present. Let the gossips talk. Georgia no longer cared. She had found something she thought she would never have again: love, partnership, hope. The wedding night was spent in the farmhouse that was now truly theirs, and Georgia discovered that Thomas's competence extended far beyond farm work. He was gentle and patient, worshiping her body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. And when she finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt safer than she had in years. Spring brought new challenges. Word reached Clifton Hill of troubles in the Western Territories, of land disputes and violence. Thomas grew restless, his eyes often turning to the horizon, and Georgia worried that he would grow tired of farm life, that the mountains would call him back. One evening, she confronted him about it. "If you want to leave, I will understand." Thomas looked at her in genuine surprise. "Leave? Why would I want to leave? You seem distracted lately. I thought maybe you were getting bored, that this life was not enough for you." He crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Georgia, listen to me. I have lived alone in the wilderness. I have hunted and trapped and survived on my own, and none of it, not one single moment, was as fulfilling as waking up next to you every morning. This life, this farm, this is everything I want. I am not going anywhere." "Then what has been bothering you?" Thomas hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking about expanding the farm, maybe buying some of the adjoining land. Old man Harrison is looking to sell, and with the money we made from the harvest, we could afford it. But I did not want to make that decision without talking to you first. This is your farm. Your home." "Our farm," Georgia corrected. "Our home, and I think expanding is a wonderful idea." They bought the Harrison property in April, doubling the size of their holdings. Thomas threw himself into the work of making the new land productive, and Georgia worked alongside him, the two of them building something lasting. In June, Georgia discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, and finally, pure joy. "A baby," he breathed, dropping to his knees in front of her and placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" He looked up at her, his eyes bright with tears. "Happy does not begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Georgia, everything I did not even know I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Georgia suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and Thomas fretted over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest, that she not work too hard. It was endearing and frustrating in equal measure. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but I worry. I cannot help it." Georgia softened, seeing the genuine concern in his face. She pulled him down for a kiss. "I will be fine. We will be fine. You are going to be an amazing father." As her belly grew, so did their excitement. Thomas spent his evenings building a cradle, carving it with the same intricate designs he had put on the jewelry box. Georgia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. In February 1867, on a snowy night that reminded Georgia of the night she and Thomas had married, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, but when Thomas finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Georgia thought her heart might burst from the sheer overwhelming love she felt. "He is perfect," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Irving, honoring both the past and the future. Little Samuel had his father's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both his parents completely. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Thomas proved to be a doting father, pacing the floor with Samuel in the middle of the night, changing nappies without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. Georgia watched them together and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. One afternoon in late spring, when Samuel was 3 months old, Georgia was in the garden with the baby in a basket beside her when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming down the road, and her heart sank when she recognized Horace Pemberton and 2 of his associates. Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression wary. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Pemberton dismounted, his smile oily and false. "Mr. Irving, Mrs. Irving. Congratulations on the baby. Charming." "What do you want, Pemberton?" Georgia asked, standing and brushing the dirt from her skirt. "I'm here on business, I'm afraid. The bank has received an offer on this property, a very generous offer. The buyer is willing to pay well above market value." "The property is not for sale," Thomas said flatly. "Now, do not be hasty. This is a lot of land for 2 people to manage, especially with a new baby. You could take the money, buy a nice house in town, live comfortably. We are comfortable here, and we can manage just fine." Pemberton's smile faded. "The thing is, Mr. Irving, the buyer is a very influential man. He has made it clear that he wants this land, and he is used to getting what he wants. It would be wise to consider his offer seriously." Thomas stepped forward, his posture radiating barely contained aggression. "You listen to me, and you listen good. This is our land. We worked for it. We built it up, and we are not selling. Not to you, not to your mysterious buyer, not to anyone. You can tell your influential friend that if he wants this property, he will have to wait until I am dead and buried, and even then it will go to my wife and son. Now, get off my land before I help you off." The 3 men exchanged glances. One of Pemberton's associates, a rough-looking character with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "Big words for a man alone out here." "He is not alone," Georgia said firmly, moving to stand beside Thomas. "And we have neighbors, friends, people who will not take kindly to threats." Pemberton held up a placating hand. "No one is threatening anyone, Mrs. Irving. We are simply making a business proposition. But I can see you are not interested at this time. We will leave you to think about it." After they left, Thomas immediately began preparing. He cleaned his rifles, made sure the ammunition was stocked, and reinforced the doors and windows of the house. Georgia watched him work, fear curling in her stomach. "Do you really think they would try something?" she asked. "I do not know, but I am not taking chances, not with you and Samuel here." That night, Thomas kept watch from the porch, his rifle across his knees. Georgia stayed inside with Samuel, trying not to let her fear show. The baby seemed to sense her tension, fussing more than usual. Nothing happened that night or the next, but the peace had been shattered. Thomas remained vigilant, and Georgia found herself jumping at shadows. A week later, help arrived in an unexpected form. Georgia was inside when she heard voices and went to the door to find Thomas talking to a group of men on horseback. She recognized several of them neighbors, farmers from the surrounding area. "We heard you had some trouble with Pemberton," one of them said, a weathered farmer named John Calloway. "Same thing happened to the Millers last year. Pemberton and his mysterious buyer tried to force them off their land. We ran them off then, and we will do it again if we have to." "I appreciate that," Thomas said, clearly moved. "I do not want anyone getting hurt on our account, though." "This is not just about you," another farmer said. "It is about all of us. We let them run roughshod over one of us. They will come for the rest. We stick together. We are strong." They organized a rotation of men to help keep watch on the Irving property, and Thomas reciprocated by offering his help with their farms. It was a reminder that despite the gossip and judgment, there were still good people in the world, people who understood that community mattered. 2 weeks later, the confrontation came. Georgia was inside nursing Samuel when she heard shouts from outside. She quickly put the baby in his cradle and grabbed the shotgun Thomas had taught her to use, then went to the window. A dozen men on horseback surrounded the house, all of them armed. Thomas stood on the porch, his rifle in hand, and Georgia could see several of their neighbors emerging from the barn and fields where they had been working. A well-dressed man on a black horse rode forward. He was older, perhaps 50, with silver hair and a face like carved granite. "I'm Marcus Fairbanks. I own half the businesses in this county, and I want this land. I'm prepared to pay you $5,000 for it." "And I'm prepared to tell you to go to hell," Thomas replied calmly. Fairbanks's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake. I could crush you like an insect." "You could try. I have a dozen men here. You are outnumbered." "Am I?" Thomas gestured to the barn, to the fields where more men were appearing, all armed. John Calloway and the other farmers had brought reinforcements, and suddenly Fairbanks's dozen did not seem like so many. "This land means something to us," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the yard. "It is not just property, not just a business investment. It is our home, our future, our children's inheritance. You cannot buy that, no matter how much money you throw at it. Now you have a choice. You can ride away, or you can start something you will not be able to finish. What is it going to be?" For a long moment the tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Fairbanks raised his hand, and his men lowered their weapons. "This is not over," he said, his voice cold with fury. "Yes, it is," Thomas replied. "Because if you come back here, if you threaten my family again, I will not be so civilized about it. I have lived in the mountains, Fairbanks. I know how to make a man disappear so thoroughly that not even the buzzards will find him. Keep that in mind." Fairbanks stared at him for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following. As soon as they were out of sight, Georgia sagged against the doorframe in relief. The neighbors stayed for dinner, a celebration of their victory and their solidarity. As Georgia watched Thomas talk and laugh with the other men, saw the respect in their eyes, she felt a fierce pride. Her husband was not just strong in body but in spirit, the kind of man who would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. That night, after everyone had left and Samuel was asleep, Georgia and Thomas lay in bed together, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When I saw all those men, I thought, I know, but it is over now. Fairbanks is not stupid. He knows he cannot win against a united community. He will find some other property to bully." "You were amazing today, so strong and brave." Thomas tightened his arms around her. "I was terrified. But I have learned something in my life, Georgia. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is loving something so much that you will face your fear to protect it, and I love you and Samuel more than anything in this world." Georgia tilted her head up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I love you too, so much." The months that followed were peaceful. The farm prospered, Samuel grew strong and healthy, and Georgia and Thomas fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together during the day and held each other at night, building a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. In the autumn of 1868, Georgia discovered she was pregnant again. Thomas was thrilled, though he worried even more this time, hovering over her constantly. "I survived the first pregnancy," Georgia reminded him with exasperation and affection. "I will survive this one too." Their daughter was born in May 1869, a tiny red-faced bundle with Georgia's dark hair and a temper that made itself known from the first moment. They named her Grace, and she was anything but graceful, squalling and demanding and completely irresistible. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Thomas patiently showed him how to be gentle, and Georgia's heart melted watching her husband with their children, so tender and patient. Life was not always easy. There were bad harvest years and sick animals, storms that damaged buildings and illnesses that scared them. But through it all, Georgia and Thomas faced every challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. In 1871, on a warm summer evening, Georgia and Thomas sat on the porch watching Samuel and Grace play in the yard. Samuel was chasing fireflies while Grace toddled after him, laughing with delight every time he caught one and showed it to her. "Do you ever regret it?" Georgia asked suddenly. "Giving up your life in the mountains, your freedom?" Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Georgia, that was not living. That was just existing. This you, the children, the farm, this is living. This is everything I ever wanted but did not know how to ask for. I just want you to be happy." "I am happy, happier than I have any right to be." He reached over and took her hand. "You gave me that, you and this family. I wake up every morning grateful for the day that brought me to Clifton Hill, to your door. I meant what I said all those years ago. I am here, and I'm staying put. Forever. Georgia leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. She thought about Samuel Vaughn sometimes, the boy she had married, the soldier who had never come home. She mourned the life they might have had, but she could not regret the life she had found instead. Thomas had been right. Life was too short and too hard to waste on should-haves and maybes. All you could do was grab hold of the happiness that came your way and hold on tight. In 1873, their third child arrived, another son they named Henry. Samuel was 6 now, already helping Thomas with the farm work, and Grace was 4, a wild child who kept Georgia constantly on her toes. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the land as much as his father did. Grace was all fire and determination, already declaring that she was going to be a doctor when she grew up. Never mind that such a thing was nearly unheard of for a woman. Henry was the quiet one, happiest when he was reading or drawing, his imagination taking him to far-off places. Thomas's hair started to show threads of silver, and lines appeared at the corners of George's eyes, but their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper, tempered by the years and the challenges they had faced together. In 1875, they celebrated 10 years of marriage with a party that brought together friends and neighbors from all over the county. As Georgia looked around at the smiling faces, at her 3 beautiful children, at her husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Thomas led Georgia out to the porch where it had all begun. "Do you remember the night I proposed?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Of course. You gave me your mother's ring and told me you were here and staying put. And I have kept that promise every single day. I know, and I have loved you more with each passing year." Thomas kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Here is to 10 more years, and 10 after that, and 10 after that for as long as we both shall live." "Forever," Georgia whispered against his lips. "I am yours forever." The years continued their steady march. The farm grew and prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Samuel took over more and more of the daily operations, showing a natural talent for farming and a head for business. Grace shocked everyone by actually pursuing her dream of becoming a doctor, leaving for medical school in St. Louis at 18. Henry discovered a talent for teaching and eventually opened a school in Clifton Hill. Georgia and Thomas became grandparents in 1886 when Samuel married a sweet girl named Elizabeth, and they had a daughter. Grace followed a few years later, marrying a fellow doctor and having twin boys. Henry married his childhood sweetheart and had 4 daughters who wrapped him around their little fingers. Through it all, Georgia and Thomas remained each other's constant. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing, but their love never wavering. On warm evenings, you could still find them on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, just as they had done for decades. In 1895, Thomas fell ill. The doctor said it was his heart, that it was simply worn out from years of hard work and hard living. Georgia refused to leave his side, sitting by his bed and holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "Georgia," he whispered one evening, his voice weak but his eyes still clear, "I'm not afraid. I have lived a good life, a full life, because of you. Do not talk like that. You're going to be fine. We both know that is not true, but it is all right. I am ready." He squeezed her hand with what strength he had left. "Promise me you will not grieve too long. You still have so much life to live." "I promise," Georgia said, though the words felt like lies. How could she not grieve the loss of the man who had been her everything for 30 years? "I love you," Thomas said. "I have loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond this life into whatever comes next. I love you too, so much." Thomas smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. "I am here," he whispered, "and even when I am gone, I will still be here. In this farm we built, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunset we watched together. I'm staying put, Georgia, forever." He closed his eyes then, and Georgia felt him slip away, felt the moment his spirit left his worn-out body. She laid her head on his chest and wept, mourning the loss of the man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had built a life with her that was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. They buried Thomas Irving on a hill overlooking the farm, where he could see the fields he had worked, the home he had built, the life he had created. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, and Georgia stood dry-eyed through it all, knowing that Thomas would not want her to fall apart. The months after his death were hard. The house felt empty without his presence, and Georgia often caught herself listening for his footsteps, or turning to tell him something before remembering he was gone. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. Samuel ran the farm now, doing his father proud. Grace came home as often as she could, bringing her medical skills to the community that had raised her. Henry's school thrived, educating a new generation of children, and Georgia, now 74 years old, spent her days surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the mountain man who had come into her life when she needed him most and had stayed until the very end. On a warm summer evening in 1900, Georgia sat on the porch watching her great-granddaughter play in the yard, chasing fireflies just as Samuel had done all those years ago. She was tired, so tired, and her body ached with the weight of all her years. But she was content. She closed her eyes and felt the evening breeze on her face, and for just a moment she could have sworn she felt Thomas beside her, his hand in hers, his voice whispering in her ear. "I am here, my love. I am staying put." Georgia smiled and let herself drift, knowing that wherever she was going, Thomas would be waiting for her. And when she opened her eyes again, she would see that crooked smile, those clear gray eyes, and she would be home at last. They found her the next morning, peaceful in her chair, a smile on her face. And though her children and grandchildren mourned, they also celebrated, knowing that she had lived a full and beautiful life, that she had loved and been loved in return, and that now she was reunited with the man who had been her partner, her protector, her everything. The farm stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the love and hard work of Georgia Vaughn and Thomas Irving. And on warm summer evenings, if you sat on that old porch and listened carefully, you could almost hear them. A woman's soft laugh, a man's deep voice, the sound of two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something that would last forever. In Clifton Hill, Missouri, they still tell the story of the widow whose husband vanished in the war and the mountain man who came down from the hills and said, "I am here, and I am staying put." It is a story of loss and hope, of second chances and enduring love. It is a story that reminds people that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, and that true love is not about perfection or timing, but about two people choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. The end came for Georgia Vaughn Irving on that peaceful summer evening in 1900, 75 years old, and surrounded by the legacy she and Thomas had built together. But in a way, it was not really an end at all. It was simply the next chapter, the continuation of a love story that had transcended time and circumstance, that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. In the small cemetery on the hill, two headstones stand side by side. One reads, Thomas Irving, beloved husband and father, 1838-1895. The other reads, Georgia Vaughn Irving, beloved wife and mother, 1825-1900. Between them, carved into a shared base, are the words that define their life together: here and staying put forever. And in the hearts of their descendants, in the stories passed down through generations, in the very soil of the farm they built together, Georgia and Thomas Irving live on. A testament to the power of love, the strength of commitment, and the beauty that can bloom even in the hardest of times, in the wildest of places, when two souls find each other and choose to build a life together. The farm still stands today, worked by the great-great-grandchildren of Georgia and Thomas, a piece of living history in the Missouri countryside. The house has been updated and expanded, but the original structure remains, as does the porch where two people fell in love and built a future. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the fireflies come out and the stars begin to shine, you can still feel their presence, still sense the love that made this place a home. This is the legacy of Georgia and Thomas Irving, not just land or buildings or material wealth, but the proof that love can triumph over loss, that courage can overcome fear, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple decision to stay, to commit, to say, I am here and I am staying put, and mean it with every fiber of your being. Their story is a reminder that in the Wild West, where life was hard and death was common, where survival often meant putting yourself first, the greatest act of courage was choosing to love, to build, to create something lasting. Georgia and Thomas did that. They took the broken pieces of their lives and forged them into something beautiful, something that would outlast them both and continue to inspire long after they were gone. And so, as the sun sets over the farm in Clifton Hill, Missouri, as it has done for over a century since Georgia and Thomas first stood on that porch together, we remember them. We remember the widow who found hope when all seemed lost, and the mountain man who found home in her eyes. We remember the life they built, the love they shared, and the legacy they left behind. It is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth carrying forward into the future. Because it reminds us that no matter how dark the times, no matter how uncertain the future, love endures. Love builds. Love stays. And sometimes, just sometimes, love says, I am here and I'm staying put, and means it forever.